Well, hello, you beautiful, beautiful people. How are you doing on this fabulous midweek hump? That's it, the midweek hump already. How is this week going so quick? In fact, the whole year has gone quick. Anyway, you don't want to be talking about days of the week. I know what you're here for. You're here to get your meat and potatoes in. So let's crack on and get on with it. As this is video 1 of 2 today, because look, I have a confession, and that is that there's been some new documents that have dropped in the Idaho 4 case. Some of you will know, some of you won't know, but there's been some. And look, what you've got to appreciate when I speak about these documents, and I'm not going to read them word for word, mainly because I don't want to. But I did say that I would in the event that you guys want me to. And once everything's set back up, after the spillage incident, I will do it. But for now, I don't think I need to. What I'm going to do is cut to the chase. Not what I'm doing up to this point. But yeah, let's crack on. Look, there's been some new documents that have dropped. And for the first time, I've read these documents and I've thought, do you know what? There's a massive, massive chance that this guy is indeed guilty. He's guilty, and what we're seeing is just the normal behaviour of a defence team. And I know what some people are going to say. Some people are going to say, look, you fucking idiot, we told you this all along. You was an idiot to even contemplate that he was innocent in the first place. And do you know what? He's still innocent until proven guilty. The guy hasn't been proven guilty. And the way I work is that I don't allow other people to influence the way I think. What I will do, I will look at everything. I will take everything in myself. I will read everything myself. I will look at it over and over and over and over again. I will look at what other stuff is being put out. I will then look into the credibility of that piece of information and look to see whether there is any way that that person's wrong. And I'm not here to point fingers at specific channels or specific information, but it's like the camera footage of that, the Elantra, that for a few days was like the topic of discussion, and I just looked at that one picture and thought to myself, look, I'm going to look at this picture, and is there any way that that car in that picture could potentially be Bryan Kohbergers? And it could. And then I thought to myself, and also, this isn't going to be the only picture, this isn't going to be the only footage, this isn't the only footage they've got. And to be honest, this car, you could argue that it's this or it's that, it's this car that year, and it doesn't help anything. It doesn't help anything. The only question should be, is could that car in that picture be one of two things? And that is nothing to do with the crime at all, and we're just arguing and talking about a picture that perhaps has no relevance to the case, or could the picture in that car be Bryan Kohberger's car? And yes, it could be. It could be. And the be-all and end-all is, look, it might be that he was in Moscow that night. It might be that he was there for other things. And look, this documentation, the latest documentation, touches on two very specific things. And look, I'm coming at this from a non-legal perspective, just an idiot reading over court documents that are from a country that I'm not native to. I have relatives, relations who live in both Nebraska and Florida, Fort Lauderdale and Lincoln, and you know, but that doesn't make me any better at knowing your guys' laws. So when I read these, I'm reading them like I say, just an idiot shooting in the dark. But from what I can grasp of it myself, and if you want proper law information, then head over to Mr. Sexy, Traeger's Law, lawyer you know, and he'll tell you everything that I can't, and he could tell you if I'm right and so on and so forth. But if you want layman's terms and an interpretation from me, here goes. And that is that we have seen this tug of war where Bryan Kohberger's defence team, Bryan Kohberger, saying there's exculpatory evidence and we want it. And then the prosecution don't seem to be giving them it, and they look to be telling them exactly where it is. This is where we believe that exculpatory evidence is, and they're saying no. And anyway, finally, we have a situation that appears that the prosecution have gone back and answered that information specifically, which for the first time addresses what the defence are claiming to be exculpatory and why it's not. And what it seems to be is what we kind of thought it would be, some of us, and that was the DNA situation regarding this knife sheath. It would appear, from a layman's perspective, that Bryan Kohberger's defence team were challenging the methodology in obtaining the DNA sample and how they came to a conclusion that this was Bryan Kohberger that they needed to arrest. Now, what the prosecution have gone back and said, look, basically, when and they've laid out, there's about 33 pages in this whole doc, and I'm giving you the short version because a lot of it's irrelevant. But what they're in a nutshell saying is, look, the initial procedure of how we looked to get this DNA was a procedure that can be done by the general public. We can go on these sites and we can do a DNA and try and get a DNA match. That's what we tried to do. And by doing that, we didn't get one. So we had to use a different method. And that enabled us to build up a tree of people who were connected to this DNA sample. But still, in amongst that tree of DNA, it didn't give a match to this person, this suspect, this Bryan Kohberger. So we had to go further. So then we went and got a sample that was from a refuse receptacle outside the suspect's home, and we got a sample. You know, this process. But in the end, the be-all and end-all is, in the end, we got our suspect and we did a DNA swab from him, and it matches the DNA from the knife sheath. And what they're basically saying is, look, we've got to protect everybody in this pool of people who we found. We don't feel that proportion of obtaining that information is exculpatory to the case, because it doesn't stop what the outcome was in the end. It just shows it. It shows you how we got there, and we weren't even going to use that because it's just a long, laborious process that has no part in there. At the end of the day, we did a DNA sample in the end directly with Mr. Kohberger and knife sheath and obtained a match. Doesn't really matter how we got there. So to me, it looks like Bryan Kohberger and the defence team are purely now trying to say that the exculpatory evidence is existing within procedural things. So they're trying to attack procedures to try and break that down, so on and so forth. And I thought to myself, do you know what? If you're in a situation where the only way that you're going to get out of this is to attack procedural analysis, to attack the people involved and try and I get it, it's all part of the normality of the procedure. It's what everybody does. But I think to myself, if that's all you've got, if that genuinely is all you've got is to attack that, then personally, I think that we could be looking at a guilty man. A guilty man. Like I say, this is video 1 of 2 today. Because in the event that Bryan Kohberger is indeed guilty, he did it. And again, he has not been proven to be guilty. I'm just being open and honest with you as a viewer, that from what I can see and this latest document drop and how that is, you know, the prosecution are finally saying, look, we did this and we got this in the end, and I don't want to repeat myself, but yeah, I think that the prosecution are pretty much, they're right. At the end of the day, when you're talking about the justice of this crime, you know, for these 4 victims, does some of it matter? Does the process matter if the result proves in the end that the person is guilty? It's like saying, okay, we was able to get a direct DNA sample from Bryan and the knife sheath and they matched. So we know that the DNA on that knife sheath was indeed Bryan's. Okay? So imagine that, just with that, but then somehow he manages to get off because something that happened early on in that stage had no relevance to this outcome. He was able to challenge that and prove that this piece of it was a problem. How would people feel then? How would people feel? Again, I'm not jumping ship or anything like that. I'm still a firm believer in innocent until proven guilty, because I want, you know, we talk about the Richard Allen situation over at the Delphi case. There were people who believe this guy is guilty. There are people who believe this guy is innocent. And I believe that even in the event that he's found guilty, there are going to be people who have an argument otherwise, and vice versa. And it shouldn't be like that. The process should provide a definitive answer to whether someone's innocent or guilty. And I've caused a bit of a debate yesterday. And this was reference, I made a statement about Bryan Kohbergers' parents. And I can't remember exactly what it was off the top of my head. But it was about the legal process. It was about the legal process, and people... No, it wasn't about his parents. I'll tell you what it was. It was regarding the surviving roommates obtaining legal representation early on. And people were like saying, you don't understand how the US judicial system works. We're taught that in the event of being arrested, you know, whatever, then you obtain legal counsel, you get legal representation. And I thought to myself, yeah, I think people are misunderstanding the issue here. And that is that you guys in the United States seem to be in a situation where even if you're innocent, you need to get legal representation because your judicial system's fucked. And the chance is that you could get hung for something that you just didn't do. And that's not good. And that's why I still turn around and say, if you're someone who believes that, you still have to then consider that the same thing has happened to Bryan. In the event that he was unable, he didn't get legal representation right at the beginning. He spoke to them for 15 minutes without legal representation, and then anchored up, got legal representation. He's now been charged with these murders. So I'm not 100% sold. I'm not 100% sold, but this documentation that's dropped today is the first poison in the ointment, if you like, in terms of, am I starting to see a pattern in what is happening? Am I learning a bit more about how the US judicial system is working in terms of the court procedure? And am I not seeing something that shocks me and think, oh, Bryan Kohberger has actually got something very, very valid that means that he wasn't involved? And I'm actually just seeing him trying to challenge little proportions of the process when the outcome was still the same. At the end of the day, your DNA was found on that knife sheath. Now, how it got there, and there'll be an argument to that, certainly. Just because it's on there, it doesn't mean he was there that night. It doesn't mean that it was transferred that night. But they also point out in that the knife sheath was indeed, and I know there's been some confusion around this, the knife sheath was partially found underneath a victim and underneath a comforter blanket or something. So, you know, it ain't looking good. It ain't looking good from what I can see. And yeah, there's a long way to go. There's a long road to go. But from what I've seen today and what I've seen in these documents, yeah, it ain't looking good. But it does then raise some huge, huge questions in the rest of the case, because now we have to consider if he did it, why did he do it, and how did he do it. And if you'd like to see an insight into my thoughts and feelings upon that, check out my video that will be uploaded later today. But until then, I'll see you in the next one.